This video is going to be about factoring shortcuts. So we're going to kind of go over those special cases that we just talked about. So we talked about perfect square trinomials and difference of squares. So we are going to look at those two cases. So first we'll look at perfect square trinomial. So I would recommend taking notes as I write this. All right, so a perfect square trinomial is in the form a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So what that means is both the first and the third term are perfect squares. In other words, we can take the square root and get a nice whole number. And when you take the square roots of the first and third term, multiply them together, and then multiply by 2, you should get that middle number. So when you factor it, it would actually just be a plus b and a plus b. So we can simplify that and write it as a plus b squared. All right. Next, if we look at a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. So this will be the same thing, however, the factors would then be a minus b, a minus b. And for some of you, this might be more confusing than when we just look at an example with actual problems. All right, so the reason why we're giving you this, though, is because if you do know this shortcut, it will save you a lot of time. Just like when we are multiplying, a lot of us use the shortcut. So if we have x squared plus 6x plus 9, you want to check, is that a perfect square trinomial? So you look at the first term. That is a perfect square. We can square root x squared. So I'm going to say, I'll call that a, and the square root of x squared is x. I'm going to call the last term b, because we know, remember when we factor it, we're going to get a plus b, a minus b. All right, so b would be the square root of 9, which is 3. So far this is looking like a perfect square trinomial. If I multiply a and b together, in other words, we would get 3x, and double that, I would get 6x. So since I know that when it's this form, the factors are just a plus b, my a is x, and my b is 3. So it'd be x plus 3, x plus 3. And we didn't even have to make the box. Now, if this is too confusing, you could always just go back to your box and do it that way. Let's say you don't really care about the shortcut. Well, you would do x squared and 9. We would put 9x squared at the top, 6x at the bottom. I need two numbers that multiply to 9x squared and add to 6x, and that would be 3x and 3x. And then you come up with your edges, and what you end up getting is the exact same thing. Keep in mind, we could also write our answer as x plus 3 squared. Okay, let's go ahead and try another one. So what if we have x squared minus 14x plus 49? So let's see. Well, my a value would be x, because that's the square root of x squared. My b value would be 7, because that's the square root of 49. If I multiply those together, I get 7x, and then when I double that, I do get 14x. So this is a perfect square trinomial. However, it's in the form a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. So we'd actually use this now. We're going to use a minus b, a minus b. So the factors would be x minus 7, x minus 7. Or you can write it as x minus 7 squared. Remember, you could always go to the box if this is too much for you. All right, let's go ahead and try a more challenging one. How about 4x cubed minus 24x squared plus 36x? Okay, so looking at this, well, first of all, it's x cubed, which we know is wrong. Remember our last lesson, 8.1.4, that was talking about factoring completely. In other words, factoring out a GCF. So what do all three of these terms have in common? Well, they have a 4 and an x. So if I take that out, 4x times x would give me 4x cubed. 4x times negative 6 would give me negative 24x squared. 4x times 9 would give me 36x. So now, is this a perfect square trinomial? And I'm sorry, that should be x squared. Well, a would be x, b would be 3, because the square root of x squared is x, the square root of 9 is 3. If I multiply those together, I get 3x. If I double it, I do get 6x. So keep in mind, though, this one will be x minus 3, x minus 3, because of the fact that it's a negative 6x. But remember, we have to put our GCF into the problem. Or we can write it as 4x times x minus 3 squared. All right, so that is the shortcut for factoring perfect square trinomials. Then we also have difference of squares. So I think a lot of you will find this to be pretty simple, and probably a lot of you will want to use this shortcut. So difference of squares is in the form a squared x squared minus b squared. So what that means is you can take the square root of the first term and the second term. So there's only two terms. So that should be a giveaway right away. We should see that it's a binomial. So in order to qualify for a difference of squares, it has to be a binomial. You have to be able to square root the first and the last term, and there has to be a minus sign. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So if I have x squared minus 9. All right, so my a value would be the square root of the first term, which is x. My b value would be the square root of the second term, which would be 3. Okay, so it passes that test. It is two terms, and there's a minus sign. So this would be a difference of squares. So the factors would just be x plus 3, x minus 3. Now, you do not have to write out the whole a and b. I'm just doing that because for some of us, that is a little bit easier. So for example, if I have x squared minus 36, we should kind of at some point be able to just write it's x plus 6, x minus 6. So how I'm getting that, x is the square root of x squared, and 6 is the square root of 36. Okay, we will try one last one. So if we have 4x squared minus 49. So how I like to do it is I know this is a difference of squares because I can see that the square root of 4x squared is 2x, so that will be the first part. I know that the square root of 49 is 7. It's two terms and it has a minus sign, so then these would be plus and minus. All right, that's everything for factoring shortcuts.